Hey, Fred Minnick here with another No Frills review. Low budget, just an iPhone here with the record button going and in my little studio. So as I mentioned in the last review, I'm backlogged, and so I'm going to be doing quite a few of these like this as I find time. And today I'm going with Parker's Heritage, the 2021 release, the Kentucky wheat whiskey, 11 years old with a heavy char. Now you can find more information about this in the description. I got a little blog post about it, more details about the char levels and everything. But I do want to talk about why this bottle is so empty. Now, it may surprise you that I happen to like whiskey in my off hours as well. So when I'm at home, I sip whiskey with my best friend, who's my wife. And let's just say that we really like this one a lot together. We had a couple date nights or a couple nights when the kids were in bed, and comes out a little bit of wheat whiskey here from Parker's Heritage. And this is why I try to get the distillers to ship to my office instead of my house, because if it goes to the house, it's a roll of the dice. It's a roll of the dice if it's ever going to make it to my office for a formal review. So if you're a distiller, make sure you're shipping to my office and not my house, because if my wife and I get a hold of a bottle during date night, forget about it. It may end up like this. So this one has been getting sipped on quite a bit. And I mean, it's to the point where I was like, if I don't take this out of the house, I'm never going to review this. And that is to say, without, I would say, subjective nature, or to be objective, I will not comment as to whether or not I previously liked it, but the bottles will kind of give you, a little heads up. So this series is always so important because Parker Beam was a mentor of mine, an iconic figure, a very important person in the bourbon community, and just a loving soul who helped so many people at Heaven Hill. He passed away of ALS a few years ago. And when they announced that he had ALS, the Heaven Hill decided to work with the ALS Foundation, and Parker became a fighting force, a fighting face of fighting ALS. So when you buy Parker's Heritage, a portion of the proceeds goes to the ALS Foundation. And I don't know if you've ever lost anybody, if you've ever known anybody who has ALS, but it's a horrible, disgusting disease. And I actually spent some time with Parker in his final days, and I wrote about that and about what it was like and what he would do throughout the day. And I also shared that story in the description. So I hope you get a chance to read that, because you get to know Parker a little bit. And I haven't always liked all the Parker's releases. So even though I was very close with Parker, and I remain friends with his widow, Linda, I still am objective about the bottles. And he'd kick my ass if I did it any other way. So even though I'm about to review this and it has his namesake, if I don't like it, I'll say it. But if you're watching this, Parker, from above, I just want you to know I miss you, and I thank you for everything that you did for me personally and for the bourbon industry. So here we go. Parker's Heritage wheat whiskey. So what is a wheat whiskey? First of all, this is not bourbon. So anytime that I have reviewed a wheat whiskey before, people say, how does it compare to other wheated bourbons? It is not a wheated bourbon. So do not think about this as a wheated bourbon. Do not compare this to Maker's Mark, Weller, or Pappy Van Winkle. Those are bourbons. Wheat whiskey is its own category of whiskey. And wheat whiskey is a category of whiskey that you pretty much sucks. It is not a category that you have people lining up to make a lot of, because wheat, when it's distilled, it can come out really bubblegummy. It can come out really acidic. It's just not a good flavorful grain to have be the predominant grain. And in the American styles of whiskey, a category is 51% of something. So much like bourbon has to be at least 51% corn, wheat whiskey has to be at least 51% wheat. Now, Heaven Hill happens to put a whole lot of corn in there. So while it is at least 51% corn, you better believe, there's a lot of corn in this bad boy. So they're able to get that corn up there so it can at least be in a similar style or flavor profile as bourbon. Now, it is aged in new charred oak barrels, just like this. They used a heavy char on this. Heaven Hill's heavy char is going to be different than what is considered a heavy char, like a Buffalo Trace, so that's always going to be different. Everyone's different. Again, you can read more about that in the description. But I always got to explain, this is wheat whiskey. Wheat whiskey, not bourbon. So you taste it with that in mind. If I were to taste this as a bourbon, I would be thinking about it as a bourbon. I am not, however. I am tasting it as a wheat whiskey. As a taster, you need to think about what you are tasting categorically. So here we go. First of all, so it is a heavy char for Heaven Hill, and that color is almost red. I mean, that is dark right there. I kind of like that close proximity of the camera. I gotta just get up in there. Woo-hoo-hoo, it's dark. And look at them legs just dripping down. You can see these little tight little beads, those tight little beads. That is not how Heaven Hill whiskey normally looks like, the legs anyway. So I'd be curious. I'd be very, very curious to know, what went differently with the aging process. Oh, maybe it's that, charring technique. But definitely different. Definitely different. Okay, so smell. Caramel. Caramel in like a bread pudding, in one of those little ceramic cups coming out of the oven. And icing, icing that you put on like a bread pudding or like a cinnamon roll. God damn, I just spilled it all over my damn computer. Spilled it on myself. (122 proof). Just hits that palate like butter, just dripping on down the jawline, curling up underneath. It's got all kinds of, this caramel, it's caramel city, but there's also like a back end of like banana and cinnamon. This is a very, very complex whiskey. Again, not bourbon. This is a wheat whiskey. And it is tracing a lot like, it's tracking to me like some of the great wheat whiskeys that I have had in the past, and they've mostly been from Heaven Hill, which they have a brand called Bernheim that's a wheat whiskey, and they put out a wheat whiskey for the Parker's Heritage Collection in the past. This is tasting very similar to those, and I put the review that I did on the last one in the description as well. But this is different. This has got some tanginess to it. So the other ones, tend to be very caramelly and icing forward, but this one's got some spice. It's got some backbone, some depth to it. And there's this overwhelming banana note, which I never associate banana with either wheat whiskey or Heaven Hill. So to see that banana note is an incredible experience. So here we go. I'm going to do this again. Taste it one more time. No wonder my wife and I have been sipping on this one so much. It smells good. And by the way, conversational tasting whiskey is not analytical tasting whiskey. So if I'm sitting down having a whiskey with you, I'm not necessarily, I think, trying to break it down like, oh my gosh, look over here, it's got this marzipan. No, it's got this over here. I reserve those finer, elegant details to come on out here in my office. Okay, there we go. The prevailing banana is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. I like it. So, this caramel note has kind of developed into like a Cuban flan that has like a little caramel icing or dripping or sauce over the top of it. It's really buttery, just kind of dripping on down the jawline. There's this banana nut bread, banana, some kind of banana pudding. I'd also say there's a bit of like a rice, kind of like a sweet rice, like a sweet brown rice note in here, and just this elegance of like back end cinnamon. It finishes, and this is where the rub would come in on this particular taste profile. Nose gets a grade of an A, palate's like an A, so these are like high level scores for nose and palate. But you get on the finish, and it's like you're on this trajectory to you're going up here, and then it drops off. It's actually a much shorter finish than I have an expectation. So the palate's very enjoyable, the nose is enjoyable, the finish is quite a bit disappointing. But that still being said, if I'm scoring this is still going to get in the 90s, and I'm being very, very picky and being very analytical of it when I bring up the finish. But that, my friends, this is still a very, very good wheat whiskey. Again, a wheat whiskey, and if I'm doing a comparative to it, there's not a long list of comparatives that I can give, and this is probably going to end up being my wheat whiskey of the year, just because there is not a large pool of wheat whiskeys. Now, the one that I had last year was from Journeyman, Corsets, Buggy, and Whips, which is fantastic. It was a beautiful release. I have not seen many wheat whiskey releases this year, so I very much doubt anything could outtaste this one. That being said, if I'm being very critical of it, that finish falls off. But that's going to do it for what ended up being a very long review. I think it's because I got to talking about my wife, which I always get excited to talk about her, and talked about Parker Beam, whom I miss dearly. And so if you get a chance to buy this one, I'd say go for it. It's going to be, I don't think it's going to disappoint you, but in terms of a comparative for you, to give you something else to compare to, you'd have to go back a few years when last time Heaven Hill released a wheat whiskey. So, but that's going to do it for this episode, this tasting. If you'd like to see more honest reviews, click that subscribe button, and I'll get back into the production value at some point, but as I got these things to get through, I'm very behind. Bear with me as the iPhone persists. Cheers, folks. Be safe out there. Remember, vodka sucks unless it's being used for hand sanitizer. Woo!